Дорогие друзья, уважаемые гости Валдайского клуба,
Dear guests of the Valdai Club, I am glad to welcome you to the final session of the 17th annual session of the International Valdai International Club. It is a particular pleasure and honor for me to welcome a traditional guest of our final sessions, namely President Vladimir Putin of the Russian Federation.
Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, distinguished participants of the 70th plenary session of the Valdai Club, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you to our traditional annual meetup. This time around, it takes place in an unusual format, through a video conference. I see some people in the hall of the Valdai Club, so still some people are present physically, and I think that the discussion was also taken shape. And yet we see that the epidemics of the coronavirus had a profound impact on the social, business, international life, but it didn't stop there. It changed the day-to-day life, the habits of people everywhere. Almost every country in the world has introduced some sort of enforced restrictions. Public events have been cancelled. Even for your club this year was a difficult one too, but the crucial thing is that you continue working through the use of the cutting-edge remote technology. You host fierce, insightful discussions. You debate. You introduce new experts that share their views. They voice out engaging, creative, often controversial and diametrically opposing views on the current developments. This debate is in much demand right now. It's very useful when there's no shortage of difficult issues that need to be answered. We are yet to wrap around our heads around the epidemic, its present and future impact for the humanity. But as we confront this peril, this challenge, the international community is trying to come together, and it managed to accomplish certain things together, but let me be frank with you, it accomplished far less than could have been done and should have been done. In the face of such a colossal common challenge, and these squandered opportunities also invite genuine international discussion. Russia, from the start of the epidemics, focused on the core value, on life and safety of people, and this was a conscious choice. It was a choice stamped by the culture, from the culture and spiritual traditions of our nation, from its complicated and often dramatic history. Just remember the huge demographic losses that we sustained in the 20th century. We had no other way. We had to fight for the life of every man, for the future of every Russian family. And so we did just that. We tried to do everything to save health and lives of our citizens, to help parents and children alike, to help the elderly, those who lost their jobs, to keep the unemployment, to minimize the economic damage. We had to support millions of entrepreneurs who are in charge of small businesses or family businesses. You, just like everyone else, I think, keeping tabs on the daily data on the epidemics in the world. Coronavirus is not yielding, and it's still a serious challenge. So I think this creates a background anxiety for many people. They start to think that it's a kind of a new era right now, that we're not just on the threshold of major changes, that this is the start of a new era of tectonic shifts across the domains of our life. We see the head-breaking pace of many processes that have been discussed in the Valdai Club sessions in the past. For instance, 6 years ago, in 2014, the discussion was dubbed the world order, new rules or game without rules. So we've discussed this topic. So what now? Now, regrettably, the game without rules is really horrifying, but it's an accomplished fact right now. The pandemic has reminded us how fragile human life is. Could you imagine that in this technologically advanced 21st century, even in the most well-to-do, prosperous countries, population could have been rendered vulnerable and exposed to this ostensibly not that fatal infection, not that fatal threat. And yet life itself has shown us that it's not just about the accomplishments of the medical sciences with its fantastic accomplishments. Turned out that something else is even more relevant and important. It's the way the public health care is organized and whether it's accessible and available or not. The values of mutual help, duty, self-sacrifice, this is what unites people. Accountability, composure and integrity of the authorities, its readiness to appreciate the public demand and at the same time clearly and justifiably explain the rationale and the consequence of the adopted measures, in order to stop people from succumbing to fear, to not become estranged, and inspire confidence that, whatever the difficulty, we'll stick it out together. The fight against coronavirus has shown that only a capable state can efficiently address the crisis. It runs counter to claims of those who the role of states in the global world globally is shrinking, of those who say that it will be giving way to some other shapes of social organization. It's true, everything changes, and it might happen at some point in future, but today we think that this is not the case. We have always believed that strong state is a basic enabler of the development of Russia. And we have seen this thesis to bear true once again. We've been painstakingly restoring and buttressing the state institutes after their decay and often total destruction in the 90s. Now, let me ask you, what is a strong state? What makes it strong? Granted, it's not about the total control or the law enforcement acting tough. It's not about ousting the private initiative or infringing upon civic initiatives. It's not even about the might of its military or defense potential, although I think you understand how important this component is, given its geography and the whole array of geopolitical challenges. Given our historic responsibility as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, responsibility to keep the global stability. And yet I'm convinced that the strength of the state is in the trust of its citizens, the trust that citizens put into it. Power comes from people. And it does not simply mean coming to a ballot box or casting a vote. It's all about the readiness to delegate a broad mandate to the elected officials. The ability to perceive the state, its bodies of state, its civil servants as their representatives, as those who are entrusted with decision-making, and also as those who can be held accountable for doing the duty properly. At the same time, the institutional framework can vary. It can take whichever shape. I mean, it doesn't matter how the political system is called. Each country has its own political culture and political traditions, their own views on how they should develop. Attempts to blindly copycat somebody else is pointless and harmless. It's crucial that the states and the society will live in harmony. And trust and confidence is the most reliable, the better foundation for productive work of the state. Only by working together we can strike an optimal balance of the freedom of actions and the security guarantees. And once again, during the darkest moments of the pandemic, I sensed pride, and I'm still proud of the Russian people. I'm proud of our citizens, of my fellow compatriots, of their readiness to work everything possible for one another. And primarily, I'm proud of our doctors, nurses, of our ambulance workers, for everyone who keep our healthcare going. I believe that the civil society will be a key enabler of Russia's development going forward, which is why we seek to make sure that the citizens, our citizens, have the final say, to make sure that meaningful contributions and popular demands from across the society will materialize. Naturally, it prompts a question. How does this happen? How does this popular demand take shape? Whose voice is the state supposed to hear? How do we understand if it's truly a popular vote, or is it just some backroom whispers, or even something irrelevant for our nation, some rowdy clamor bordering on hysteria? What we often see is how a bona fide popular demand is being substituted by an interest of some narrow social strata, or even foreign external powers. You know what? True democracy and civil society cannot be imported. I've mentioned this time and again. They cannot be a product of some do-gooders from abroad, even if they purportedly wish you well. Theoretically, this is probably possible, but let me be frank with you. I've never seen anything of the kind in my life, and I don't really believe in this. We all know, we've been through that. We know how this cargo cult democracies function. This is but a hollow shell, a sham, devoid of any semblance of sovereignty. Nations actually have no say there. So, the quote-unquote heads of state are vassals whose fate is decided by the masters. So tell me once again, only citizens of the country are entitled to decide what their popular demand is. Russia has been through a long and winding road when basically the primary source of creating and funding the NGOs were some foreign foundations. Granted, not all of them had self-centered goals or malice aforethought, but some had a goal to throw the situation off balance, to interfere into our affairs, to weigh in on the Russian and internal and foreign policy, to lean it in their favor. Not all NGOs are like this. There are independent civil society groups, and probably there are genuine organizations wishing to help, and we are really grateful to them. But even in these instances, they were alien and extraneous bodies that reflected the views and interests of their foreign patrons, not the Russian citizens. Which is to say, they were tools in somebody else's hands, with all that it implies. Strong, free, independent civil society is by definition a nation-centered and a sovereign one. It has its origins in the grassroots level. It can have various shapes, but this is a product of the culture and traditions of a specific country. It's not a byproduct of some abstract transnational mind that is nothing but a screen for some foreign interests. A duty of a state is to support civil initiatives, to open up new opportunities for them, and this is exactly what we do, and I think that this issue must top the official agenda for decades to come, regardless of who holds which office. This is a key enabler of the sovereign and sustained development of Russia, its mainstay. It's the basis of genuine continuity as we move forward. It's the mainstay of our capacity and ability to rise to global challenges. Dear colleagues, you are well aware that controversies and pressing issues abound in international life. There was a moment when the stable, after a fashion, and the predictable model of the Cold War era existed. The situation changed since then. Don't take it as a sign of wistfulness for me. I'm not missing that era at all. But the world changed many times over since then. And the forces that we used to call political elites had no time, or maybe they were unwilling or unable to analyze, so what's exactly going on? Some countries hastened to slice up the pie, to reap the benefits that they gained after the cold standoff, quote-unquote, is ended. Others rushed to adapt to the new world order, and still others, our country included, and we had a very dark experience indeed. We struggled to survive, to keep the country from breaking up, to keep agency in the international political affairs. At the same time persists in asking the question, what future has in stock for humanity? How the global order should look like, or what it's supposed to look like? Are we going to go forward meaningfully, or are we going to feel our way in the dark with nobody to rely upon but yourselves? The most recent report of the Valdai Club, your club, says, and I quote, "The changed international environment shows that institutes are no longer the guarantee of a global stability and governance. Rather, they impede the shaping of a system of relations that would be fit for the new era." End of quote. So the authors believe that we are about to see the world where certain states or groups of states will be acting more independently, while the traditional international organizations will slip into irrelevance. Well, let me say this. It's quite clear what is the rationale of this stance. In fact, the post-war global order was created by three winning powers: the Soviet Union, the United States, the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom's role has transformed ever since the USSR no longer exists, and Russia was marked by some as a non-starter. Let me be frank with you. We are assessing our capacities, intellectual, territorial, economic and military capacities soberly. We are very clear-eyed about them, and our potential is something that we strengthen and make it more robust day in and day out. There are still forces who believe that Russia will just fade away and be no longer relevant. Well, their only concern is not to get called at our burial ceremony. Well, I cannot agree that the current international structures should be disposed of. In fact, I believe that we need to maintain all the main instruments of the global security. I mean, the United Nations Security Council and the veto rights of its permanent members. I have recently mentioned this at the anniversary session of the General Assembly, and I believe that this stance, maintaining the basics of the post-Second World War order, has broad support in the world. Now, having said that, the very idea of readjusting the institutional layout of the global politics, I think, merits a discussion. For the sheer fact that the balance of power, just like I said, has changed dramatically, especially over the last 30 or 40 years. Yes, USSR no longer exists, but there is Russia in its place. Its, well, economic weight and political clout of China grants it the status of the superpower, and Germany is on the same trajectory. It becomes a greater actor in the international cooperation. At the same time, UK and France has seen a major transformation of their role. Even the United States at some point held sway globally, but now they can no longer make such a claim for exceptionality. And, of course, the credibility and weight of such powers as India, Brazil, and South Africa has improved. It's true that not all international organizations are efficient at fulfilling their missions and mandates. They were meant to be impartial arbitrators, and yet they are driven by ideologies. They got captured by a gravity field of strong powers. They become a tool of those. Well, reshuffling rules of procedure, gerrymandering with privileges and mandates and bias, especially when it comes to conflicts implying the rivalry of powers or groups of states, is regrettably a common practice. And it is deploring when credible international organizations, motivated by someone's egotistic interests, getting dragged into politically driven campaign against certain leaders and countries. This practice discredits these institutes and leads to their decay. On the other hand, though, we have positive experience. We have examples of groups of stakeholder states coming together to address specific issues. For instance, a case in point would be a Shanghai Cooperation Organization that, for almost 2 decades now, has been helping to settle territorial disputes and reinforce stability in Central Asia. It creates a unique spirit of partnership in this part of the world. Or take Astana format. It helped to unlock the logjam of the political diplomatic process in Syria. It's worth remembering OPEC+. It's an efficient, although rather complicated tool for stabilizing the global oil markets. The world is getting ever more fragmented, and such approach can prove more productive. What's crucial, though, it addresses specific problems and more. It can help to reinvent multilateral diplomacy itself, which is important. It's also obvious that we need a shared, universal, basic backbone structure of international affairs. Whichever groups, blocs, tactical alliances emerge now or going forward, we can't do without such a backbone structure. It is just that the multilateralism should be understood not as 100% inclusion, but rather a need to engage actors who are actually holding a stake in settling a problem. And granted, no good comes out of the following situation. Say, there's a process that implies certain groups of stakeholders that can actually come to terms with one another, and then third parties invite themselves shamelessly and brazenly with the only goal to showcase their ambitions, power, and influence, to carve out a niche for themselves to con everybody out, rather than make a meaningful contribution. Let me say this again. The international system right now is fragmented. It's often split into parts, it's splintered. But there are tasks that require more than just the potential of a certain state, even of influential states. Issues like international stability and security, countering terrorism, and addressing acute regional conflicts are one of those, as well as ensuring global economic development and fighting poverty. Expanding cooperation in healthcare. I think it's more than relevant today. I've mentioned all those issues in details about a month ago at the anniversary session of the General Assembly. In order to tackle these issues, we need to put together a systematic, joint effort designed for the long run. However, there are even more further-reaching issues, something that every one of us has to deal with. I think many of us have read The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry in the childhood. There is a steadfast rule. You wake up in the morning, you wash yourself, you tidy up yourself, and then you tidy up your planet. It's a tedious job, all right, but not difficult at all. And I'm convinced that we have to be constantly engaged in this quote-unquote tedious work. If we want to save our shared home for the generations to come, we have to tidy up our planet. The issue of environmental protection is a staple item of the global agenda, but I would look at the bigger picture. We need to abandon the excessive, the unrestricted overconsumption and choose frugality instead, choose reasonable sufficiency. We should live not in the present. We should think about tomorrow. You often say that the nature is extremely vulnerable for human activity, especially as the natural resources are mined and exploited on the large scale globally. And yet, a man is still exposed to natural disasters. Many of them are caused by anthropogenic interference. Besides, many scientists think that outbreaks of dangerous diseases is a response to such an intrusion, and this is why it's crucial to build the harmonious relationship of man and nature. We see this on the example of climate change. This problem requires real action. It's no longer an abstract highbrow item for the scientific debates. It's something that has direct relevance for every citizen of Earth. Global warming makes the ice cap melt and makes the permafrost melt down. The experts believe that in the decades to come, the pace and intensity of such a process will only grow more intense, and this is a serious challenge for the rest of the world, and of course for Russia too, where permafrost takes up 65% of the territory. Such changes can deliver an irreparable damage to biodiversity. It can have an extremely negative impact on economy and infrastructure. It can endanger people. This is a very relevant issue for us. It's true for pipeline systems on the permafrost, for citizen settlements that are located on the Russian territory that stand on the permafrost. It is believed that by the year 2100, about 25% of the permafrost will thaw, will melt down, and this is a serious danger. The situation can spiral out of control. It's kind of a chain reaction. The meltdown of the permafrost causes the methane emission into the atmosphere, and its greenhouse effect, just pay attention now, its greenhouse effect is 28% more harmful than the carbon dioxide. Consequently, the temperature on the planet will keep going up. Permafrost will keep melting ever faster. Ever more methane is emitted into the atmosphere. A vicious circle. After all, do we really want to live in a Venus climate with its lifeless and scorched surface? Average Earth surface temperature is 14 degrees Celsius. In Venus, it's 462. Let me go to something completely different now. Make no mistake, planet Earth has more than just geographic continents right now. It has an almost infinite, almost boundless digital space, and year in and year out, people are exploring it ever faster. The enforced restrictions caused by the coronavirus epidemics have boosted the development of remote digital technology. So today, communications, internet-based communications, have become part of global commons, and we should seek to make this infrastructure, the cyberspace in its entirety, to operate seamlessly and securely. So the remote working arrangements are no longer a necessary precaution against the pandemics. In fact, we're talking about the new forms of employment, new forms of social interaction or human communication. As the technology progresses, these changes are inevitable. The circumstances of today have merely accelerated the process. Everybody now appreciates the convenience of this technology, but there is a flip side to this medal. The growth of all the risks in the digital space. Yes, cyberspace is fundamentally novel medium. The one that in fact never had a universally recognized rules of conduct. The technology have by far outstripped the legal framework. And at the same time it's a very peculiar domain, the one where matter of trust looms large. I think we should use our historical experience, we should look into the retrospect. What do I mean by this? Well, during the Cold War there is a specific term, the confidence-building measures. It related to interactions between the USSR and the United States, between the Warsaw Treaty countries and the NATO, which means to the military-political sphere. Today, and I stress this, the rivalry is hybrid, as it were. It has impact on all domains of human life, which means that we need to build confidence across the board in all domains. And cyberspace can be a testing ground for this kind of new confidence-building measures, just like arms control has laid the path towards the better confidence and trust in the world globally. It's clear that designing the measures for cyberspace is very difficult, but it's past time we started this effort. And Russia is actively promoting bilateral and multilateral arrangements in cybersecurity. In the United Nations, we have introduced 2 draft conventions on the topic. We have founded an appropriate open-ended working group. I have just recently addressed the United States with a proposal to start a comprehensive discussion of international information security. We're fully aware that there's the election campaign going on, and the United States politics have plenty of things on their mind. But we hope that the next administration, whichever it is, would respond to our proposals on this issue and others on the Russia-America agenda. And those are plenty. Global security issues, future of the New START Treaty, and many others. Believe me, there are plenty of things to discuss, and we stand ready to discuss them frankly, in earnest and equitably. Yes, there was a time when the crucial international issues have been, in fact, discussed by Moscow and Washington. Well, it's a long time gone. But we believe that this bilateral dialogue, in this instance, the bilateral dialogue in cybersecurity, is an important step to a far-reaching discussion that would engage many other countries and organizations. Well, maybe the United States will be unwilling to join this effort. That would be lamentable, but we will not stop at this. We will be ready to engage with it with anyone interested in joining the efforts. I think there will be plenty of people, plenty of partners like this. One other aspect. We are living in the era of major shocks and crises. We're no strangers to this, especially the Cold War generation, let alone the Second World War generation. It's not just a memory for them, it's part of their life record. Well, it makes me wonder, humanity has advanced beyond the beyond technologically and socially, economically. And at the same time, the humanity has lost touch with the moral ground. The ethical values are vague. Humanity has lost its way, and the raison d'être, it no longer understands what's the mission of the man on the planet Earth. This crisis cannot be resolved through diplomatic negotiations. You cannot convene an international conference to deal with this. It takes revisiting the priorities and rethinking the goals, and we should start with ourselves, with every human being, with the community, with the state, and only then we should proceed with reshaping the global order. Coronavirus pandemics this year can become a reference point for this transformation, and this reassessment, this rethinking is still going to happen. Sooner or later, we all understand that it's necessary. And I agree with those who say that it's better to start it sooner rather than later. We can start it now. And it's no coincidence that I remembered the historical analogy, the elder generations that went through the thick and thin of the past century. The things that we've discussed today is something that the youth will be dealing with. All the topics that you've been debating about, it is the youth, the people, the younger generations who will have to find solutions to this. Russian citizens who are now maturing and gaining life experience will have to address these challenges in the 21st century. They have their own views towards the past, the present, the future. And yet I believe that there is one constant about us and about them. These are the best traits of our nation. It's the patriotism, the will to overcome, the creativity, the ability to work hard, to help one another, the ability to surprise the world by finding solutions to the impossible tasks. Colleagues, I've discussed various problems today. I've mentioned many things. And I hope that despite all the difficulties, the world will be able to come together and fight the real threats, not the make-believe ones. We'll find inner strength to confront them. I hope that the world will cast aside the self-centeredness, the greed, the feckless and wasteful consumption. One might ask, isn't it utopian? Isn't it just an exercise in wishful thinking? Well, you know what? When you look at the actions of our fellow human beings, I have my doubts. And yet I strongly believe that the common sense will prevail. I believe that we still can understand one another. We just have to open our eyes and cast aside the silo mentality and understand that the earth, the air, the water is for us to steward. It's our legacy and we need to cherish it, just as we need to cherish the value of every human life. This is a complex and wonderful world, and it leaves us no other option. We don't want to make the mistakes of the past again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for this detailed account. You have just said that the pandemic has to become a starting point for a new understanding. And as far as I can tell, you have this new understanding. You're working on it because such things as trust, harmony, the very sense of us being on this planet Earth, you don't often hear such words. And as a follow-up to what you have just told us, I would like to ask some clarifying questions. Yes, we see this understanding taking shape, and the Valdai Club is trying to make its own, however meager, contribution to this understanding. But when it seemed that the world would never be the same, it all stabilized, and when world policy started to awaken from its lethargy, it turned out that the old agenda was still there. The old conflicts got back, becoming even increasingly numerous, and despite the fact that international politics are somewhat suspended, you are still actively involved in world affairs. Do you think it comes as a shock, or what are the sentiments you sense from your counterparts at the highest level? You have just said that the old conflicts got back when the situation loosened up a little bit, but they never went away, actually. Many are talking about a second wave right now, saying that the situation has returned back to its circuits, as it were, to spring this year. Look at what is happening in Nagorno-Karabakh. This conflict never disappeared. It's still there. But it's not about the conflicts. I think that the need to fight the pandemic brings our world community together. But despite that, and apart from that, we still have to take additional measures to address the conflicts that exist. I refer to Syria, to Libya, to the Middle East, to others, to terrorism. The environmental issues are still there as well. The pandemic is not going to help us in that regard at all. But as far as this understanding is concerned, this understanding that when acute global crises strike, we need to work together. Well, in that regard, the pandemic can help us realize that. But so far, it has not taught humanity to pull our efforts together 100% as we're required to do. I've just mentioned several crises, and we addressed the UN, certain bodies asking them to suspend on humanitarian grounds, at least temporarily, all economic restrictions. And I'm not talking at all about sanctions against Russia, because we'll live, we'll survive. But there are many other countries that are suffering, and they have been suffering and are still suffering because of this coronavirus infection. And they need help, not just outside help, at least help that can come from the abrogation of these economic sanctions that can in the form of humanitarian supplies, medical equipment, medicines and others. These are humanitarian supplies, pure and simple. But these restrictions are still there under the pretext of some reasons that have nothing to do with any humanitarian thinking, even though everyone is talking about humanism. But we have to be frank in front of one another. We have to put aside all these double standards. These months have demonstrated something, and I'm confident that if people hear what I'm saying right now through the media, it'll be very difficult for them to disagree with what I'm saying, because everyone at the very core, at their heart, will say the same, but due to some public reasons, they say that they still have to keep restrictions against Iran, Venezuela, Assad. But what has Assad to do with the suffering of common people? You have to provide these people with medicines, with technologies, with some basic resources for medicine in a targeted fashion, but they're not doing that. So, on the one hand, the will to get together is there. But on the other hand, in practice, we do not see that happening. I do not see this wish materialize, even though the trends are there. Now, as for technologies, there's another thing. Certainly, online education, remote medicine, all modern digital technologies that have already been making a way for themselves, made great advances in previous regulatory frameworks. Because of this pandemic, these technologies require politicians, legal experts, experts in administrative governance to move towards making decisions on this matter faster, and this changes the world, of course. Thank you very much. Another question as a follow-up to your statement. You said unequivocally that the main value is safety and life of the people when you spoke about the strategy and the fight against the pandemic. The strategy is clear, but the tactics can be different. They vary. In spring, there was a vivid criticism with regard to countries that chose their own path, like Sweden and Belarus, that chose not to shut down their economies and they didn't follow the path of a complete lockdown. There were many arguments, both for and against. 6 months has passed, and as we can see, most of the world is following the path of these countries, not the one they chose back in spring. And I think you mentioned yourself that you're not envisaging shutting down the economy completely. So the balance is shifting, and the balance sometimes should shift towards saving the economies. Well, the balance we have is still the same. It's not changing. I'm not going to talk about Sweden. Well, maybe I say a couple of words and about Sweden, about Belarus, about what is happening in these countries. It is the choice their governments are making, but our path remains unchanged. The lives and health of our citizens, this is our peremptory imperative. And of course, life and health, these issues are tied inextricably to healthcare systems that have to enjoy full support from the federal budget, from regional budgets, and from other budgets. And in order for these budgets to be replenished, the economy has to carry on. And these things are linked inextricably, and we have to strike this balance. And I think we managed to strike this balance from the very beginning, because we have taken a number of very serious measures to sustain the economy to the tune of 4.5% of our GDP. Some countries have gone beyond that. But it's not just about the volume of the money that we've allocated. It's about how efficiently we are using this money. And I think, and incidentally, the government and I discussed some related matters, and I think we managed to work in a targeted fashion. We funneled a lot of money, which we've managed to accumulate over the recent years. We benefited from the macroeconomic health of our economy, the fundamentals, taking advantage of this good foundation we laid over the recent years. Using all that, we managed to sustain and support our citizens, their families, families with children, small and medium enterprises, even big businesses, whole industries. And on the whole, as we can see, there is no need, as of now, at least in Russia, to get back to complete restrictive measures, the ones we had to resort to in spring when we put people on paid furlough and we shut down whole industries. This is partly due to the efficiency our healthcare system has demonstrated, and we have reserves now, like additional hospital beds. We've got the medicines there. We've got the protocols for treatment. Our medical specialists know how to proceed. So we know, and we have this confidence that we can overcome these issues. That's the first thing I wanted to tell you. Secondly, from the outset, and I'm reminding you, given the vastness of our territory, from the very outset, we were saying that we were going to delegate a lot of competences in taking these decisions to the constituent bodies of the Russian Federation, the Russian regions. And if you look at the international experience, you'll see that most countries have followed this path because it was efficient. Right now, we do not need to do that because our economy is recovering, manufacturing sector is recovering, the agricultural sector is performing splendidly. We see an uptick, and our export is recovering as well. Yes, there are some issues which we still need to address. But if you look at our macroeconomic fundamentals, then you'll see that they're okay. As far as the shrinking of our economy is concerned, in the second quarter, we saw an 8% decrease, the US 9%, the Eurozone around 14.5%, 14 and 7%. You mentioned Sweden that didn't introduce any restrictions, but they also saw their economy shrink first. They announced 8.3%, then they revised it downward, upward to a little less than 8 or 7%. They didn't introduce any restrictions. They didn't follow our example, for instance, when we supported our economy and citizens, but the outcome is the same, because all of these factors in the modern world are closely intertwined. And if an economic downturn is inevitable, then the first thing we have to attend to is the people. And this logic is perfect, irreproachable. As far as Belarus is concerned, I spoke to President Lukashenko on many occasions, and he understood full well the magnitude of the threat. Belarus does not have the same gold and currency reserves or the economic landscape is not as diverse, and he had to keep the economy afloat. But on the whole, the situation there is no worse than in other countries. So we are not in front of such a choice. We didn't have to choose between the people or the economy, and right now the choice is not there either. There is no need to introduce tough restrictions. There is no need to shut down companies. Yes, we need to readjust the support we provide to certain sectors like small and medium enterprises. Some of these spheres require additional support. Sometimes we should probably extend the preferences with regard to taxes or other preferences that we introduce and that are soon running out. There is a need to have a closer look at transport, at services. We are fully aware of that. We see that, and we're going to continue working in that regard, however difficult it might be. We're going to work together based on the trust and confidence of the people, and we're going to weather these difficult times. Thank you very much. We are moving on to our traditional discussion. Structurally, it is going to be organized in a very complex fashion because we have people in the audience. I am getting questions from those who are following us online and who are texting these questions to me, and there are also colleagues who have a chance to ask their questions personally. I'm going to be a fair operator of this process. I apologize in advance. Let's begin with Timofey Bodichov, our colleague from the Valdai Club. Good evening. Thank you, Mr. President, for this unique opportunity. Mr. President, amid the global economic shocks, as we can see, there are increasingly numerous statements that the liberal market economy is no longer a sufficiently reliable instrument countries have in their possession in order to survive and go on. Recently, the Pope Francis said that capitalism has exhausted itself. Russia has been living in a capitalist model for more than 3 decades. Does this mean that we need to search for an alternative? Is there an alternative? Maybe the leftist idea is going to get back to the forefront, or maybe something completely new. Karl Marx once spoke about the birthmarks. Oh, I think it was Lenin who spoke about the birthmarks of capitalism. I wouldn't say that we live completely in a capitalist economy. We go step by step, building a market economy and its institutions. And for modern Russia, it was starting from scratch. But given the world developments, this is something we are doing. But after a long period of a planned economy, more than around 100 years, it is very difficult for us to transition to a market economy. As far as pure capitalism is concerned, it existed at the beginning of last century in its pure form. But after everything we saw in the world economy and in the US and the 20s, in the 30s, after the Second World War, everything changed drastically. And we have spoken about that on many occasions. I do not recall whether I spoke about that at the Valdai forums, but experts who are far better versed than I am in these matters and whom I talk to on a regular basis say something that is absolutely comprehensible, understandable. When macroeconomic fundamentals demonstrate stability, sustainability, the funds are growing, consumption is growing, and people start to say that the government is only a hindrance and that they should get back to the efficient instruments of market regulation. But should a crisis or a problem strike, everyone runs back to the government, saying that there is a need to reinforce the regulatory function the government is playing. And this happens all the time. It bounces there and back again. And it happened during the previous crisis, like we saw in 2008. And I remember perfectly when the key shareholders of our key biggest enterprises came to us, not just on the Russian scale, but also internationally, very big companies, and they were willing to sell their shares at a not very low price because they were afraid of the responsibility, they feared the pressure from the shareholders. But this time, the business is acting in a different fashion. No one is trying to shirk the responsibility. On the contrary, they are trying to use their own resources. They are not acting greedy. Well, of course, people act differently, but mostly businesses are socially responsible and oriented, and I am very grateful to these people. And I would like them to hear me. As of now, we have no planning economy, no planned economy. Take China. There is no purely planned economy there, nor does purely market economy exist anywhere, because the regulatory function of the government is required. Take such big international industries as aircraft construction, aircraft building. The regulatory function is there. You see it, or sometimes you don't, but it's impossible for this market to exist without such a regulatory function. And we see that all countries that they acclaim to the title of big aircraft building power, they all provide support from the government to these industries. And these types of support are very numerous, and the same applies to car industry and other industries as well. So we have to determine for ourselves how far the government should be involved in the economy, where and how the government's role has to be reduced. I often hear it said that the government plays too big a role in the economy. But when a pandemic strikes, like this time, when we have to reduce the business activities, when the traffic falls, not just passenger traffic, but also cargo traffic, when the question begs itself, what are we to do to help aviation, because the passengers are not flying or flying not that actively? We see that the government support is required. There is no pure market, nor is there pure government governed economy. But we have to determine for ourselves how far the government should be involved in the economy. But all of that based on the goals we pursue. Well, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Look at the shrinking of the GDP in the so-called advanced economies, more than 14% in Europe. What about the unemployment rate? I think it's more than 10% in Eurozone. Yes, we saw an uptick in unemployment, but it's still 6.3% in Russia. All of that is the fruit of government regulation. What about the inflation rates? We were fighting inflation. And this is yet another example of the regulatory function the government is playing. The central bank is one of the most important instruments in the toolkit of the government. The central bank, the government, they're all using their programs, like the government with its social programs, with national projects, funneling a lot of money into the economy, thereby having an impact upon the state of our monetary policy. And as you can see, our inflation rate stands at 4%, to be precise, 3.9. And I've just spoken to the chairman, the central bank governor, and I think we are going to be within the anticipated range of around 4%. This is the regulatory function the government is playing. But of course, we should not suppress the economy with excessive regulation, with too much of the government presence, because that would be tantamount to death as well. So it is more of an art, I would say. And I think so far the government has been doing a pretty good job.
Mr. President, well, since you mentioned the need not to be greedy, well, recently there was a very vibrant discussion around the Ministry of Finance proposal to cut down to do the layoffs among the military personnel, to cut down the salaries. Do you think it's appropriate? So it's a crisis, so we gotta cut the salaries and furlough. Well, Ministry of Finance is making this proposal year in and year out. If there is a crisis, if there is no crisis, Ministry of Finance is there for you to streamline the budget. And this is what every single Ministry of Finance in every single country does. So there's nothing special about the policy of our Ministry of Finance. So far, no solutions have been made. We're not planning to cut down on the salaries or furlough or lay off some people, but this is just a proposal from the Ministry of Finance. It was not even transmitted to me yet. It's just a discussion. When it is time to make the final decision, to do the final say, I will look into the economy in general and to the situation around the actual disposable incomes in the public at large, in the law enforcement, in the military, and the civil service. How does it stack up against the incomes on the private markets so as to avoid any lopsided situation on the labor market? Let me say this. On the practical level, these discussions are not yet going on. This is being discussed on the government level. Okay, we got one tangible result. The military may no longer worry about this. I now want to give the floor to a person, a good friend of ours, Sam Charat, our guy in Washington. He is in his assignment post right now, but we have a chance to connect to him. Sam, over to you. Thank you, Fyodor. Mr. President, I wanted to go back to your initiative on confidence-building measures in cyberspace. You mentioned this in your keynote speech. There's much debate about the fact that is the trust a consequence of negotiations or a premise to hold them. Well, you know that during the election campaign, many people bet on the fact that in this sphere, in this domain, Russia is quite active in this track. It's acting aggressively, it interferes into other states' affairs. Is there a time, perhaps, to think about some kind of a ceasefire or truce in this sphere to create the premises for establishing a minimal level of trust and confidence and to start the negotiations, and perhaps to build the confidence step by step going from there? Do you think this digital truce, digital ceasefire idea, can it hold water? Well, let me tell you this. The matter of cyber crimes, they have been committed ever since the digital technology existed. They are committed now, they will continue to be committed, just like any other breach of law. But we're talking about interstate relations right now. In my introductory remarks, I mentioned the arms control talks between the USSR and the United States. And it was no coincidence. We decided to stick to specific levels that we could keep in our arsenals. So we can now use this as a chance to discuss something else, the cyberspace, and then move the discussion to a broader level. And you are mentioning truce or a ceasefire. What kind of ceasefire? I think we are having the ceasefire right now. You said that Russia is actively interfering into others' affairs, and I'm saying no, we're not. After all the official investigations that were held in the United States and other countries, including the special attorney office capacities, all of them have ended up at the same conclusion. There was no interference. Russia did not interfere, so making the preconditions for starting the talks, it's a non-starter. We just have to sit at the negotiation table and start talking. What's wrong about that? We're not suggesting anything that would run counter to the interests of our partners. Well, they might believe that somebody else, some third party, is interfering into their affairs. Well, let's design some verification instruments. Do we have such a tool? I don't see the reason for such a stubborn refusal to negotiate. During the last days of Obama administration, they signaled their readiness to start a dialogue. Well, this initiative curtailed quickly. The administration changed, and with the new administration, we started anew. We had to start from the scratch again. So it's been 4 years now, and we accomplished exactly nothing in this attempts to negotiate. So hopefully, when the election cycle is over, our American partners will be ready to respond, to somehow meaningfully interact with us. Thank you very much. Director of the International Economic Relations Institute, Fyodor Vitalovsky, you have the floor. Mr. President, in your keynote speech, you touched upon a very hot issue in international politics, the arms control. During the Cold War, especially at its final stretch, the Soviet Union and the United States spared absolutely no effort to build an architecture of treaties, an architecture of confidence-building measures that defined the aggregate amounts of arsenals that decreased the risk of the conflict. But over the recent years, our American partners have been persistently dismantling this system. First, the ABM, then the INF Treaty, the Open Skies Treaty. So where we are now, the issue of extending the New START Treaty is really a pain in the neck. It takes quite a lot of effort to move this from the deadlock. Mr. President, do you think that the arms control system will be there in future and what steps can be done to save it. Well, I will chip in. We have a huge heap of questions on the new treaty, on the New START treaty, on the new initiative that has been voiced a couple of days ago, and a couple of questions. What does this mean, and are we making too big of a concession? You asked, is there a future for the arms control treaties and this kind of arms control infrastructure and architecture? The way I see it, the world itself will have no future if there will be no future for limitations in arms control. This is what we are urging our partners to think about. You mentioned the withdrawal of the United States from the ABM treaty, then the withdrawal from the INF treaty, the withdrawal from the Open Skies treaty. Well, it's not the procedure is not finalized, but the United States said that they initiated the procedure. So we are asking them, what's the reason for this? They are not giving us any reasons, just because. Well, the European partners are asking us, well, can you just stay? Let them go and you just stay. Oh, all right, that's a funny situation. So you are all NATO members, you are gonna make your control flights, inspection flights, you will pass the information on to the Americans, and we will be bound by the treaty limits? Well, let's just get serious about it. Let's be frank about it. As far as I see it, even the European partners of the United States wish very much for the US to stay and not to dismantle the treaty. As for the INF, it's I think we've been kicking that horse long enough. Now, I think that in case of the ABM treaty, United States were quite frank, blunt, rude, you might say, but at least it was a frank and honest stance. And now they are making some pretexts. So this is a pretextual withdrawal, as if Russia was making violations of its own. Well, if it were true, if it were just as our American partners are describing, they would do just exactly the same. They will be engaged in these clandestine violations, covertly. No, they're not going to do this. They are making a show out of it. They are quite open about it. So come on, not everybody is that, fluffy and innocent, and it's just us who are unwilling to disarm ourselves. It's not that. We all know about the cases of the caps on the missile silos, or the way they change the fixtures and the strategic bombers. It can sound Byzantine to many, but the experts know what I'm talking about. The caps on the silo launchers and the strategic bombers. So maybe there is a political goal behind it, because militarily it holds no water. Makes no sense. And the best thing to do would for everyone to comply with the verification arrangements and the control arrangements, and in this instance our arrangements will be well secured and well protected by the control framework. Now to the New START treaty. We've been discussing these issues when we negotiated the treaty. We knew about the problems all along. There was only one thing disregarded in this. As a reciprocal act, when the United States withdrew from the ABM treaty, Russia has designed its own high-precision conventional weapon systems. It's true that the United States so far has no such hypersonic capabilities, and no other country has. But at some point in future, they will have it. So they're going to tell us, well, you have this kind of weapons, we don't, let's factor this in. And we are saying, okay, let's do this. We should factor in the number of the vectors, the carrying capacity, the delivery vehicles, and not just the warheads. So what I suggested is a very simple concept, something that's pretty obvious. Nothing is gonna happen if we just extend the treaty by 1 year with no preconditions, and we will persistently address all the concerns both of American party and of the Russian party. If we work together, we can arrive at something. So where's the trick here? In the past, there was no talks on the substance. Actually, our partners dodged any kind of substantial discussion. So we ended up where we ended up. In February, the treaty is expiring. So what are the steps that we can make? We can extend this treaty by 1 year, and then we use this 1 year to the best of our abilities and to negotiate something else. What's the alternative? We can let it expire, and then the rest of the world, Russia, United States, and all the rest of the world will have no arms control architecture whatsoever, nothing to restrain the arms race. Well, I think that the second scenario is much, much worse, and it's an acceptable one. Let me say this again. We're not clinging to this treaty. If our partners decide that it is unnecessary, all right, we cannot do anything to convince them otherwise. Russia's security will not suffer. After all, we have cutting-edge arms systems, so they have our back. That's the first part. The second part relates to the proposal to make them multilateral and invite China, our Chinese friends, to join this new framework. Well, we're not against this, but don't shift the burden of engaging them on us. If you want to engage China and invite them, well, let's do this. Are we the impediment on this way? No, we're not. Well, the Chinese rationale is quite straightforward. Yes, China is a huge country. It's a great power with an immense economic potential, with 1.5 billion people. But its nuclear potential is almost half the one of Russia or the United States. So they're asking us a reasonable question. So why are we going to freeze our smaller potential? What can we say to this? Well, they have the sovereign right. It is a huge nation, and it has a sovereign right to act as they deem appropriate. It's their right to pursue this kind of policy in the national security field. I mean, we can probably make some attempts. We can make this a point of contention, and we can effectively drive any negotiation into a deadlock by doing so. But if you truly and earnestly want to engage China, then why is it only China? Where are other nuclear countries? What about France? There was just recently publicly stated that it tested the new submarine-based cruise missile. And there are other nuclear states that are not recognized as such, and yet the whole rest of the world knows that they have nuclear weapons. So what are we going to do? Pursue the ostrich policy and pretend that nothing's going on? So are we going to talk the talk or walk the walk, or what? If the final goal is the security, we need to engage in a genuine conversation. But the question is there a framework, a backbone architecture for such negotiations? Do we have at least some sort of an example for making these arrangements? We are ready to start from the scratch. But if you earnestly want to know what's our stance, where do we stand in this, I think that we should not waste the previous accomplishments, and we should build upon the agreements and the architecture that was built by the past leadership of our country. Well, if our partners decide otherwise, we are ready to engage in any track. Thank you, Mr. President. Anatoly Livin, a long-standing partner of ours who was unable to come physically, but he's with us remotely.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for speaking to us. And I would also like to thank you personally for your very strong statement on climate change and the environment. My question, however, relates to the new outbreak of conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. Russia, like other members of the international community, has been trying very hard to bring about a peaceful solution to this conflict. But so far, these efforts have failed. If they continue to fail, given Russia's old historic links, given Russia's military alliance with Armenia, will it be necessary in the end for Russia to take sides against Azerbaijan and Turkey? On the other hand, could this perhaps provide a positive opportunity for Russia? Given the increasing confrontation which we see between France and Turkey over Turkey's claims in the Eastern Mediterranean, could this perhaps be an opportunity for a rapprochement between Russia and France and other West European countries? Thank you.
Последнюю часть вопроса я не очень понял. Извините.
Can you please repeat the last part of your question?
Может ли быть сближение с Францией и Европой на основе того, что Турция противостоит и им, и в какой-то
Can there
степени?
be a rapprochement with France and the rest of the Mediterranean because of their confrontation with Turkey?
Начнем сначала с Нагорного
Well,
Карабаха.
let me start at the beginning with Nagorno-Karabakh and who will support whom. You just mentioned that Russia had historical ties with Armenia, but we also had historic ties with Azerbaijan. After all, Russia is home to over 2 million Armenians and approximately 2 million of Azerbaijanians. And it's not just the people who come to as seasonal workers, it's people who live here, and they are sending billions as remittances to support their families back home. All of these people have strong ties with Russia too, on humanitarian level, on a human level, on a business level. They also have ties to Russia. On a family level, they have ties to Russia. So for us, both Armenia and Azerbaijan are equal partners. And it's an unbelievable tragedy for us to see people dying there. We want to establish a full-fledged cooperation both with Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's true. There are aspects, there are nuances in our relationship. With both of them, they're not exactly the same. They have their peculiar traits. With Armenia, we share their religion, the Christianity. But then we have very close ties with Azerbaijan on other tracks. As for the religious element, let me stress this, almost 15% of Russian population confesses Islam. So even in this sense, Azerbaijan is no stranger to us. Well, one thing that we should bear in mind is the history of Armenia during the First World War. The tragedy of the plight of the Armenian nation, we should bear this in mind. This was the second component of this issue. Now, the third one is that the conflict not just started as an interstate conflict, not just a fight over territory. It bursted out as an ethnic strife, a secular strife, and we have to factor this in, first in Sumaidi and then in Nagorno-Karabakh. Horrible crimes against Armenian nation were committed. we should bear all of the above in mind, and at the same time, we are fully cognizant of the following fact. A situation when a substantial part of Azerbaijan was basically lost by the country is unsustainable, is untenable. And for several years, we've been proposing all kinds of options to find a way out of the crisis, to find a long-term resolution of the conflict. I'll spare you the details, but trust me when I say this, this was a long and painstaking effort to reach the rapprochement. There were moments when we thought that just a little bit and we are going to get there. Unfortunately, it never happened. And today we are where we are. We see perhaps the worst case scenario of a conflict, and the tragedy is the loss of human life. There are huge casualties on both sides. According to our data, over 2,000 people are dead on each side, which means that the overall number of casualties is something to the tune of 5,000. For over the 10 years of war in Afghanistan, Soviet army lost 13,000 people. It was 10 years, a decade. And here we have such a short span of time and almost 5,000 people dead. And think about the injured. Think about the people who just suffer the consequences of war. Think about the children. So this is a very special situation. The Minsk group was created in 1992, I think, and Russia and France, as co-chairs, share a special responsibility for the process. But having said that, it is quite clear, and I'm confident when I say this, that all the participants of the process are sincerely trying to settle the situation. But nobody has bigger stake than Russia, because this is part of the living fabric of our nation. It's not just we are watching this happen, we are seeing how it happens to our friends, to our relatives, to people who live in our country. That is to say, here's our stance. We are trying to gain trust and confidence of both countries and act substantially as a mediator in this conflict and help them to reach rapprochement, to help them converge their postures. And I very much wish for the compromise to be found. As you know, I stay in close touch with Prime Minister Pashinyan and with President Aliyev. I talk to each one of them several times a day. Our foreign ministers, our defense ministers, our special services guys are in close contact. Our foreign ministers have just recently visited Russia, foreign ministers of both Armenia and Azerbaijan. I think they are meeting today or on 23rd in Washington. So I very much hope that our American partners will act as one, will act in unison with us, and we will wish for the best. So this is the first part. The second one relates to the disputes within the NATO, meaning the disputes between Turkey, France. We have never misused or abused these internal tensions and the relations between other countries. We have a steadfast, good, well, not a full-fledged, but still good, promising relations with France. We're increasingly we're cooperating all the more with Turkey. Turkey is our neighbor, after all. And I think I can go on into great lengths explaining the importance of Turkey for Russia. I don't think that in this particular instance, between Turkey and France, anyone needs us as a mediator. I think they are perfectly capable of negotiating with one another. However rigid the stance of President Erdogan might seem, I know that he can be flexible and you can come to terms with him. So I think, and I'm pretty sure that the situation will go back to normal as well.
Mr. President, this is a very relevant issue. So as a follow-up, the current crisis in the Caucasus is different in that the role Turkey is playing is different. You said that President Erdogan is flexible. You spend a lot of time with him, so you know that. But many experts say that virtually Erdogan is trying to extend his influence as far as the old boundary of the Ottoman Empire went to, and that was a very wide sphere of influence, and the Crimea was part of it, even though that was a long time ago, but still. So is there anything we should fear if this is indeed a consistent policy? Do you think there are going to be differences with Ankara emerging? Russia is not fearing anything, and I don't think we're in the position when we have to fear anything right now. I don't know what President Erdogan is planning and what his attitude is to the legacy of the Ottoman Empire. This is a question you have to ask him. I know that today our trade is more than $20 billion, and I know that Turkey is indeed very much interested in continuing this cooperation. I'm aware that President Erdogan is pursuing an independent foreign policy regardless of any external pressure. Within a very short time frame, we managed to complete Turk's Stream project, even though it has taken us years and years with Europe to do the same. We've been working hard at it, but Europe so far has been unable to show at least a modicum of independence and sovereignty to complete a very profitable project. A project profitable to it, that is, Nord Stream. And we managed to do this very thing with Turkey within a very short time frame because President Erdogan understands Turkey's national interests. He said they needed it, and they did it. And the same applies to other spheres like military and technical cooperation. Turkey decided they needed modern anti-aircraft air defense systems, and the best systems there are on the market right now are Russia's S-400 Triumph, and Turkey procured these systems from us. As for any aspirations for the Crimea, I don't know anything about that, nor am I interested in that, because Russia's interests are protected, they are foolproof, and rest assured of that. And I know that other partners of ours understand that full well. Now, as for Turkey's position with regards to non-recognition of the Crimea as a part of the Russian territory, well, what can I say? We have many differences of opinion, in particular with regard to the situation in the Caucasus. Our points of view diverge on many occasions, that's true. But we are aware of Europe's position, of the position the U.S. has taken. They paint themselves as Democrats. And you know that a referendum was conducted in the Crimea, but they show no interest in the vote people have cast. And I'm not even talking about the sanctions they introduced against Crimeans. If they were annexed, then why are they introducing sanctions against the victims of this annexation? And if it's a popular vote, how can you punish for democracy? So it's complete absurdity, complete nonsense. No one should be pointing the finger at Erdogan. Have a look at what is happening in other countries. Well, anyway, Erdogan's position is consistent. He does not recognize the Crimea, nor does he recognize Nagorno-Karabakh. So what can we do? We have to work hard with everyone. We have to be patient, and that is what we are doing, precisely. We have to show everyone that our position is the right one and that we're going to advocate it. And if our approaches differ, we have to search for a compromise. Well, to cite an example, we have different points of view with regard to the Southern Caucasus. We think that it is not with force or with arms that such issues have to be solved. No, they have to be solved at the negotiating table through diplomatic means. That is our position. Yes, some might say that the talks have been going on for 3 decades now and no outcome to show for that. But this doesn't mean that they have to resort to arms. Well, thank you very much. Well, indeed, President Erdogan is consistent, but he recognizes North Cyprus. Is it a sign of flexibility? Well, yes, you are right, absolutely. I had to say that, but you're right to say that, North Cyprus. But as far as I understand, nor does Turkey object to an eventual reunification of the country. What is the crux of the matter is the principles upon these principles of reunification. Now, Anatoly Tokunov, rector of MGIMO University. Mr. President, I think we are, all saying 2020, even though it has not run out yet, as a year fraught with dramatism, with unexpected events, and, you know, the joke is very widespread. If by the end of the year we meet aliens, no one is going to be surprised. My question is not about aliens. Let them be. We'll live and see. My question is about what is happening along the borders of our country. I think that, for me, as an expert, you have given a very interesting view of the Caucasus, but this is not just about the Caucasus. Along all our border, we see dramatic events unfold, like Kyrgyzstan. Yes, we know that different riots, turbulence happen around the elections there, but this year the things have taken a very dangerous turn. The situation in Belarus is very difficult as well. The Donbas issue is still very much persistent. We know your consistent and firm position on this matter, but still, my question is as follows. What are Russia's grand, broad goals in the post-Soviet space? Because what is at stake is our security, our humanitarian ties. On many occasions today, you have emphasized that these people are not strangers to us. You spoke about the Caucasus, but the same applies to our friends from Belarus, from Central Asia, from Ukraine. Thank you. You are aware better than anyone else, I think, as a professional, as an expert, that our policy in the post-Soviet space and the CIS is the centerpiece of our foreign policy as a whole. It is quite understandable because all the countries that you've mentioned are the countries with which we maintain good, friendly, bilateral relations. And the same goes for other countries whose relations with us seem to be at an impasse right now. Still, these countries are no strangers. They are our good neighbors. We know them very well because we used to live together within one country, not just for a short period of time, but for hundreds of years. We have deep ties, a very in-depth cooperation in economy, humanitarian ties too. We speak the same language. Well, in this or that sense, to this or that extent. But we are still people that belong to one cultural space. And that, let alone the history, because we have a common history, like our common victory over Nazism, because our ancestors, our forefathers, paid with blood for this victory, sealing our relations. And I think whatever happens, whatever might happen, this commonality of interest is, in the end, going to pave the way for restoring and reviving our relations, however difficult they might seem as of now. At the same time, when our common country, the USSR, collapsed, and people who were responsible for that failed to think about the geopolitical consequences that that collapse implied. They should have thought that neighbors not just have common interests, but they also have different interests, and the tug of war is very much possible. Be that as it may, I think that we can and we shall find solutions to all difficult matters on our agenda. What we have to refrain from is escalation or fueling. That we shouldn't think just narrowly at controversial issues. We also have to look broadly at what brings us together, at common interests. Let us have a look at economic integration. Tell me, who isn't interested in our integration? Only our competitors, our rivals. Whereas all countries of the post-Soviet space cannot but understand, or at least intelligent people understand, that bringing efforts together, using our common infrastructure like energy and transport, taking advantage of a common language we have, which brings us together instead of bringing us apart, all of that are competitive edges, advantages. Other integration associations have to fight for decades, whereas we have it all served to us on a silver platter, because it has been passed down to us by our forefathers. It's beneficial. Have a look at Ukraine. 2004, one revolution, 2014, another, a coup d'etat. Look at the statistics the Ukrainians provide themselves. They saw a decline of output greater than the one brought about by the pandemic. All industries shut down, the ones that were a source of pride for the Soviet Union: shipbuilding, missile building, aircraft building. These were industries that had been created by generations of people, of citizens from all across the Soviet Union. And it was a source of pride for Ukraine, and all of that as almost non-existent. The country has undergone a deindustrialization process. Even though it was one of the most heavily industrialized countries of the Soviet Union. Well, yes, Moscow, St. Petersburg, Siberia, the Ural region, but still, Ukraine was heavily industrialized, and now they've lost it all through the sheer stupidity of the ones responsible for that. But I think these common interests, as I'm hopeful, are going to pave the way for common sense. You mentioned Belarus. Yes, we've seen the turbulence. But there's something I would like to draw your attention to. You've taken note that Russia has not interfered in the developments in Belarus, and we're hopeful that no one is going to involve themselves in interfering. No one is going to try to fuel this conflict to pursue their own interests. No one is going to try to obtrude external solutions from outside on the Belarusian people, because nothing brought from outside to a people, to a country, to an ethnic group is ever going to work if you do not take into account the country specifics, the culture, the traditions. One has to give Belarus a chance to work out a solution on their own, to arrive at the necessary solutions, decisions. Maybe these decisions should take the path of making amendments to the current constitution or writing in a new one, and this is what President Lukashenko has announced publicly. Yes, some might say that he's going to write something that has nothing to do with democracy, but you can lie about everything. You can look skeptically at anything. But I'm not going to go into detail right now. I'm not going to dwell on that. But what is happening in Belarus and terms of its quality is very much different from what you see spill over into the streets of some democratic countries. Maybe there were some issues, but those responsible should be held accountable. But at least no one used lethal force fighting, shooting at the backs of unarmed people. So this requires work and in-depth look. Now, moving on to Kyrgyzstan, I think what is happening there is a bane of Kyrgyzstan and the people, both the elections and the coup. But what does it tell us? There's nothing to laugh about here.
Ну ведь это как во многих этих странах они же первые шаги делают на пути.
Many of these countries are only making first steps towards shaping their statehood, shaping a culture for state building and development. On many occasions, I have told my colleagues that we have to treat all post-Soviet countries with the utmost attention and care. And we should be very careful and support these shoots of statehood. We should refrain from any interference, because such interference simply destroys the nascent state institutions in these countries. We have to give these people a chance to work carefully, building new relations, state institutions in their countries, instead of trying to rush in with our brute and abrupt solutions. I'm very hopeful that Kyrgyzstan, as a member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union, is going to weather these difficult times. We have spent a lot of money supporting the economy of Kyrgyzstan, hundreds of millions of dollars, helping Kyrgyzstan to adapt, to be able and ready to enter the Eurasian Economic Union in terms of its phytosanitary and other standards, help them nurture many industries, projects to the tune of more than $500 million, let alone the grants to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars on an annual basis. So we're looking with compassion and concern at what is happening there. But please note that we're not trying to rush in there with our advice, with our interference, or with support for this or that side. Be that as it may, we're hopeful that Kyrgyzstan is going to see a normalization of the situation and everything is going to get back on track, and we're going to maintain good relations with this country. And the same goes for Moldova. We see what is happening there. We know that the people of Moldova need both democracy and also economic development. But who buys Moldovan wines? Does Europe do that? No, they have enough wine of their own. You know, sometimes they even throw wine into the gutter somewhere in the middle of nowhere when they drive from one country of the Eurasian economic Europe to another. So they have a lot of their own wine. So Moldovan wine has to find other sources, like Russia. We're very much hopeful that in the forthcoming elections, Moldovan people are going to appreciate the efforts the current president is taking to build relations with Russia. Thank you very much. Achim Spanger from Frankfurt is online. He's never missed any. No, this is not. Oh, yes, that's it. He's never missed any session.
Thank you so much. Mr. President, allow me to turn to an issue which is connected with a person whose name reportedly is not really used in the Kremlin, at least not in public, Alexei Navalny. A renowned Russian scholar, Dmitry Trenin, the director of the Carnegie Moscow Center, recently stated, let me quote, "The poisoning of the opposition activist Alexei Navalny has become a turning point in Russo-German relations." And this, according to him, essentially means that, another quote, "The special role performed by Germany and its chancellor in recent years is now a thing of the past. From now on, Germany will have the same attitude to Russia as all the other countries in Western Europe." My question is whether you share this view that A, there was such a special role of Germany in bilateral German-Russian relations, and B, whether you also detect such a turning point now, and if so, what Russia can do to avoid it happening, or conversely, to turn the turning point around again. Thank you.
Let me begin with the beginning of your question about the poisoning. We've heard a lot of talk about this poisoning. Secondly, if this person you were talking about, if indeed the authorities had wanted to poison him, I do not think they would have sent him to be treated in Germany, right? Right away, once the spouse of this citizen applied to me, I gave the instructions to the prosecutor's office to find out whether we could send him abroad, because there were some limitations because of the criminal proceedings, and there were some restrictions on his going abroad. But I gave the prosecutor's office the instructions to let him go, and he went abroad. Next, we heard talk about the findings of traces of Novichok, the notorious Novichok. We asked to be provided with the materials, but biological materials to start with, and also an official conclusion, so that we could complete the investigation on the Russian soil, so that we had legal and material evidence and reasons to initiate proceedings of our own. And I do not think there is anything wrong with that. On many occasions, our Prosecutor General's office asked Germany to provide these materials to us, and I do not think there is anything wrong or strange about that. And I spoke to one of the European leaders asking to send experts from Germany, from France, from Sweden. I asked to send these experts to Russia so that we could work together, so that we could garner some materials to use as a basis for initiating proceedings. But so far, we've seen none of this happen. And do you think there is any explanation you can provide for that? And it is very strange that this is happening.
Okay, so they stated there were traces of Novichok in Navalny's system. The results were allegedly communicated to the OPCW, and then they tell us, no, it's not Novichok, it's something else. So now there is a bifurcation point. So is it a Novichok or is it not? Now we are starting to have doubts about the initial claims. Okay, so let's have a joint investigation. And this is exactly what I say now. If it is so, we can start an investigation and do it together. Our history, there is a track record of assassination attempts against public activists, against statesmen, but those were duly investigated, and the people responsible were brought to responsibility, each and every one of them. We left no stone unturned, no page unturned in this. Now, to the specific case in point. We have plenty of people, the Saakashvili-like individuals in country, but I don't think that at this juncture in time, I don't think that they are currently going to change their views in a moment. I hope that it will happen, that they will turn into actual public activists, something who can contribute meaningfully and not just starting riots on the streets. So a question, it invites a question: where is the quote-unquote normal opposition in Europe or in the United States? Do you think these countries have the actual opposition? There are two parties dominating the political field in the United States, and the rest is taking place in the streets. We, on the other hand, are trying to develop our political system, and we will allow every meaningful contributor, every political actor that acts within the legal framework and is patriotic, will give such opportunity to them. Now to the question about Germany. Over the post-war period, we had a very warm and frank relationship. I think this is caused by the fact that there was a German democratic republic at a certain point, and it was our key ally in Europe. So on the grassroots level, on the political level, on the economic level, we enjoyed some good relationship. And I know that there were plenty of sympathizers of Russia there, and we appreciate that. Now, the reunification process was a process that the Soviet Union played a crucial part in. Some of your key allies, some of the key allies of Germany of today, actually were against of reunification, whatever they claim today. We have the actual statement and dispatches and archives. The Soviet Union played the part it played, and I think it was the right thing to do. A whole cannot be divided. And if a nation has a desire, a strong wish, a strong urge to unite, you cannot put artificial obstacles in this process. Nobody's going to benefit. Now, the relations between the East and the West in Germany is the internal affair of Germany. Whether the mediation and mediating role was something that was a part of the process, I don't think so. Russia is not a kind of country that actually needs intermediaries. After all, we always had strong ties with Germany. Does it mean that Germany wanted to play a special role in the relations of the West with Russia? No, I don't think so. I think it was the policy of Germany. Now it's our second largest trading partner. It used to be the first one, mind you. Now China is the number one trading partner. It outstripped Germany. Still, over 2,500 people with German capital still operate in the Russian market. There's a substantial amount of investments going both ways, and there's a major interest in German business circles to continue working in Russia. And we are actually glad to know this, because we know that there is a part of the German community that seeks good relationship with Russia. I've frequently met with German businessmen acting in Russia, and this is my sincere belief that they are our friends. And I think that what they do is they're creating millions of jobs in Germany itself, because they are selling goods, German-made goods on the Russian market, and they are made by the hands of German workers. So this is a mutually beneficial process. This all testifies to the special nature of relations between our countries, and it's a sign of a mutual interest of our countries. And this is what belies and informs our relationship. It's not about the desire to play a special role of a mediator. No, I don't think so. I think it's a mutual interest in one another, and it's not gonna go anywhere. It's not gonna disappear despite any swings of the political moods of the moment, and we on our part will do the best to keep it that way. Okay, let's stay in Europe so far. Natalie Toci from Rome, connecting in.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your extremely candid remarks. You spoke very eloquently about the importance, the centrality of the state, but at the same time, the importance of international cooperation. And you, in particular, highlighted areas like security as well as climate, which I would associate also with energy transition. Now, when it comes to security, perhaps a follow-up question on the Caucasus and the resumption of war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. At some point, hopefully very soon, there will be a new ceasefire. At the same time, the conflict itself will not be resolved. Given that the current configuration of the three Minsk Group co-chairs have been unable to deliver a settlement for the last 6 years, does Russia think that this is a setup that should be reconsidered? And then perhaps, if I may, a question on climate change and in particular energy transition. Now, energy transition requires funding. The European Union, for instance, will dedicate approximately 40% of its next generation EU fund to the Green Deal. Now, when it comes to Russia, it is clear that being a country that has depended, quite importantly, on its fossil fuel exports, stabilizing energy markets is obviously going to be key for Russia in order to obtain the funds to move forward on the energy. You spoke in your speech, you highlighted the importance that OPEC Plus played in that stabilization of the market. And I think Russia itself played an extremely important role in ensuring that supplies were cut so as to stabilize prices. But at the same time, we now are in a second wave of the pandemic, and we are likely to see demand continuing to be rather sluggish. Would you expect, or would you like to see in 2021 a further cut in supplies so as to ensure a further stabilization of prices?
I'll start with the first part of your question on the format of the negotiations on the Minsk group, whether we have to change the configuration or not. Natalie, I have no answer to your question. Much to my chagrin, actually. There is no shortage of objective reasons to this. I don't want to make Russia's role any more salient than it is. But everybody knows where Russia is, geographically, I mean. We are neighbors to both of these countries. We have huge historic ties, just as I mentioned. We have huge economic ties. We have 2.4 million Armenians in Russia and approximately 2 million Azerbaijanis in Russia. Again, the remittances are to the tune of dozens of millions of dollars. And this is one of many factors. There are humanitarian ties. There is the interconnection of the markets, so the situation is very sensitive to us. So for us, it's really different, rather than it is for U.S., Armenia, or even U.S., Turkey. It's different. The distance is there. It is not in our case. So we do feel the extra share of responsibility, and this conditions the need to act very prudently. And we need support of the United States. We need the support of France. We need the support of, 10 or 12 participants of the Minsk group. I think Turkey is in there too. It's impossible to address this dead end without them. maybe we need to reconfigure the group somehow. But we need to find a mutually acceptable deal, a compromise for both sides. For years, we've been looking for these compromises. Trust me when I say this, we were very insistent in it. We were discussing every kilometer of the map, we decided to establish the safety corridors, the exchange, the territory swap. We tried all this, to no result. It all ended in this tragedy of today, and I do hope that the hostilities will eventually end. I agree with you that the first thing we should do is to reach the ceasefire. We need to stop the violence. We agreed about it in Moscow last time. Unfortunately, it did not stick, and we will make further efforts, of course. Now, to the next question of yours. The question was about oil, the fossil fuel, the energy transition, and the oil demand. Well, Russia is also developing the renewables energy as well. It's true. Russia has one of the richest deposits of fossil fuels, but it doesn't mean that we are not going into solar or they are not looking into the hydrogen economy. We do. Moreover, we are trying to improve the current situation. You probably know that we have decided that in year 2022, 300 major polluters in Russia that emit the most part of the greenhouse gases, we want them to switch to the best possible solution on the market by 2022 and to minimize their emissions and to minimize their environmental footprint. We're fully cognizant of the fact that, oh, by the way, by 2024 they should cut down their emissions, all of them should cut down their emissions by 20%. So there are 300 major polluters spread across 12 cities. But we understand that we cannot stop at this. This will not change the nationwide strategy situation drastically. So by 2030, we seek to halve the harmful emissions. So this is an honest and earnest goal that we set for ourselves, and we will spare no effort to reach it. But having said this, let's be realistic. There is the competition out there. In the nearest future, completely abandoning fossil fuels is impossible, or so I think. I don't think that for the next 30 to 50 years, the fossil fuels will be part of the energy mix. I mean, it's just unfeasible to completely abandon them. So we are aware of about the European Green Deal, and we know the restrictions related to it. I'm not sure what is the actual underlying reason for it. Is it the economic rationale? Is it the internal political reasoning that causes new restrictions in international trade? I don't think that restrictions are the answer here. I think that we need to seek to achieve common goal. After all, we followed up on the Kyoto Agreement. We are active, the Kyoto Protocol. We are active participants of the Paris deal. We are not reneging on our commitments. We actually think that we've done the right thing. I've mentioned in my introductory remarks about the pace of the meltdown of permafrost, about the effect for the entire humanity, but, well, we will feel this effect the strongest. We have many transport systems, highways, pipelines. People are living in these areas where the permafrost is located. We have railways going there. There are cities, actual cities, that are standing on the permafrost. So it's an actual issue for us, and we will very much be engaged in the international efforts on the fight against climate change. But it does not disprove the need for fossil fuels. And then again, we have the natural gas. It's also fossil fuel, but it's the cleanest fossil fuel of all. And nuclear energy. We can use any kind of boogeyman stories about the nuclear energy, but it remains and will remain the cleanest source of energy. There was much talk about the electric cars, but what's the primary source of emission in Europe and worldwide? It's not cars. It's the coal that's the primary source of electric generation worldwide. Yes, the usage rate is dropping, but it's still there. So why do you need to introduce restrictions for the use of gas or even diesel fuel? I don't quite get it. This kind of fuels can be made extremely clean, especially if we use the advanced technologies. Well, it all smells of the unfair competitive advantages for the certain industries backed by certain politicians in certain countries. That's the only explanation I can come up with. So it's not about this wistful urge to improve the situation with the climate change. It has an economic rationale behind it. I hope that the decisions made here will be clear-eyed, will be prudent, and the right balance will be struck between the environment and the economy. Now, to the issue of OPEC Plus and the stabilizing of oil prices, we stay in contact with our partners, with Saudi, with the Americans. On the ministry level, the contacts are very frequent. Just some time ago, I spent with the Crown Prince. We are consulting each other about the situation, and we think that we don't need to change our arrangements so far. We will keep close tabs on the market. Yes, you said that the demand will be sluggish, but the market is slowly growing. The price is slowly growing. So yes, the global economy indeed has shrunk because of the pandemic, but the oil consumption is still slowly picking up. And we think that this was caused by our positive impact of our arrangements. We don't think that we need to change anything right now, but we are not ruling out the possibility of either maintaining the restrictions or maybe continuing them. And if need be, we are still open to a possibility of new measures. As of today, we see no need for this change. We agreed to closely monitor this. After all, Russia is not interested in the oil price swings in any direction, either going up or going down. And, by the way, this is where our interests with the United States dovetail nicely. Well, we know full well that American economy is also susceptible to the oil price changes, that the shale oil in America will be in a tight spot if the price is too low. Well, they've been looking into the United States did not join the OPEC Plus deal, but they are in fact complying with the same recommendations. So, as the diplomats say, the positions are converging or close among all the participants of the market. So the crucial thing here is not to harm the geological prospecting, the surveying, and the oil well preparations if we will keep the energy sector, well, subdued for a long time now, and we'll just keep wagging our fingers at the energy sector. We're going to end up at the exactly opposite situation. The oil prices will go up dramatically. So we should avoid adding the political tint to this situation. Especially the layman should should not jump at conclusions. Like I said, we need to strike the right balance between the right amount of economic measures, the income generation for the citizens, and the impact on the environment. So in this track, the balance is the key. The rest is the way to destruction.
Mr. President, we have the pleasure of meeting you on a regular basis at the Valdai Club, and we have the and the ability of making comparisons. And I think you've drawn some lessons from the pandemic, and you seem very calm, unconcerned. So we're talking about Europe. Doesn't not concern you or vex you that they are considering you almost like a murderer, that the sanctions are introduced against your closest allies? You have to explain yourself, justify yourself. You know, a little vexes me because I turn into function when I perform my duties at this post, at this position. And this function seeks to protect the interests of the Russian people, our citizens, and the country. And all the rest, I simply put it aside so that it doesn't prevent me from performing this function. And I've grown quite accustomed to such criticism. Back when, in the beginning of noughties, we were fighting the gangs of criminals in the Caucasus, and I saw that they were painting me with horns, and, you know, it doesn't concern me at all. Thank you. Let us move to another part of the world, Jan Huoshen, Shanghai. Good afternoon, Mr. President. A huge thank you for this unique opportunity. The theme of this year's meeting of the Valdai Club is new issues, how to turn the global crisis into new opportunity. I'm rephrasing a little. How do we turn the global crisis for new opportunities for Russian-Chinese relations? We see the world is rapidly changing. And amid these conditions, how are we to evolve Russian-Chinese relations, economic, political, and in terms of international cooperation? Are there any new things we have to expect, to anticipate? Well, if the question is, how are we to develop Russian-Chinese relations, my answer is very succinct. The way we've been doing over the recent years and how we are doing that right now, because these relations have been propelled to a whole new level. Yes, they are called a comprehensive partnership, strategic relationship, cooperation, but it's not about the names. The thing is, we have great trust for one another. We've managed to foster very sustainable, reliable, well-functioning ties in different domains, in different spheres. And my friend, and I think I have all reasons to call him that, President of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, he and I talk to one another on a regular basis, discussing what we have to do based on what we've achieved. And we always are searching for new opportunities to move forward. You know, we're working in aviation and the nuclear energy, I've just mentioned, developing our trade ties. Last year, our trade stood at more than 111 billion. But of course, this is not the biggest trade we can hope for. We are striving and will accomplish more. We are building infrastructure and building bridges, literally bridges, developing humanitarian ties too. We are working on big projects, complementary ones too, in energy in particular. We are planning these projects and we are implementing them. China is a big shareholder in a number of Russian projects and LNG and in natural gas production, not on the border with China, but in the north of Russia. We are also working in a number of other fields, also cooperating in the international arena. We've said that on many occasions. This cooperation is an important stabilizing factor in world affairs, which is absolutely evident. Furthermore, there is our military and technical cooperation, where our relation is long-standing, the volume is very big too, and it's not confined to purchases. We're also transferring technologies, and this is the vein in which we are willing to continue working with the People's Republic of China based on mutual respect and with trust to maximize the benefits for the Russian people and for the Chinese people. A follow-up. We've got a question that we... Incidentally, Shanghai is a twin city of my native city of St. Petersburg, and I've been to Shanghai on many occasions. It is a wonderful, beautiful, splendid city, and I would like to wish the people of Shanghai all the best. Thank you. A follow-up to this question from China as well, to clarify a little bit what you've said. Professor Lan Xiaotun asks a very succinct and clear question. How can one envisage a military alliance of Russia and China? One can envisage anything. We have always assumed that our relation has reached so great a degree of trust and cooperation that we do not need that. But theoretically, we could envisage that. We hold regular military exercises and other events, naval and ground exercises. We're also exchanging best practices and building our military. We have attained a very high degree of cooperation and military and technical cooperation. And I think what's most important, we are not just selling and procuring military equipment, we're also exchanging technologies. And this is a very sensitive matter. I'm not going to speak about publicly, but our Chinese friends are aware of that. Our cooperation with China indubitably raises the defense capabilities of China's armed forces, and Russia is interested in that, just as China is. How exactly this is going to develop going forward, well, life will tell. This is not the task we have before us right now, but this is not something we are going to rule out either. We'll live and see. Anyway, we are satisfied with how our relations are progressing with China. Unfortunately, new threats are emerging. I refer to the intention announced by the US to deploy small and intermediate range missiles in the Asia Pacific. This is certainly concerning, and we'll have to take measures to respond to that. But of course, we'll have to see what exactly is going to happen, what kind of threats this is going to pose to us, and we will act according to ensure our security. Thank you. Piotr Dudkevich from Ottawa. Mr. President, thank you very much for this unique opportunity to have a conversation with you. In your speech, you have mentioned that it is up to young people who are going to drive Russia's future and Russia's development. But across the world, young people are malcontent, dissatisfied with what is happening in the US and France. They're saying that the door to better future has been shut down on them, and more than half of young people across the world think that they're going to live worse off than their parents. So as President of the Russian Federation, I would like to ask you, what can you advise, what can you offer to the Russian youth? Well, in my speech, I mentioned that, although very briefly. Of course, the future is in the hands of young people, and I reiterate that. Secondly, mostly young people are not dissatisfied with what is happening. They are dissatisfied with what they have accomplished so far, and they want more. And it is absolutely right. This is what drives progress. This is what helps young people build a better future than the one we have constructed. And there is nothing surprising about that. And we know that from Russian classical literature, read Fathers and Sons. It's all in there. What can we offer? We assume that we're going to provide greater opportunities for professional growth. We're also going to create more social lifts for social mobility. We're going to expand the toolkit for that. We're going to create better opportunities for better education, for better careers, for building a family, for raising their income. We're also coming up with systemic measures to provide support to young families. Even amid the pandemic, most of our support measures targeted families with children. But what are these families? Most of them are young people. And we're going to pursue this path forward. I think the greatest quality young people have is their audacity, rushing forward, sometimes even ignoring some formalities that sometimes constrain older generations. And I'm hopeful that this energy is going to follow a constructive path and that the young people are going to take up the relay from elder generations, are going to carry this torch forward, strengthening Russia. Thank you. We have a very interesting connection today with Australia. I do not remember something like that happening. Please, Australia.
Thank you, Mr. President, and for the opportunity to ask you a question. I really appreciated your insightful, heartfelt, and considered remarks during your speech. And I come to you from our second state lockdown in Melbourne, Australia, which is also a sister city to St. Petersburg. Embrace also your urging to cast aside silo mentalities. My question is the following. How do you want to be remembered? What do you want your legacy to be as a world leader and the president of the Russian Federation during the first half of the 21st century? How would you like international historians across the world to write about you and your legacy as a leader, a man, and a human being at the end of the 21st century? And how might you shape this any differently during the next phase of your leadership as president of the Russian Federation?
Если был правильный перевод, вы сказали «жившего в 21 веке».
You said a man who lived in the 21st century, but we're still living. We're still very much alive, all of us. And actually, in response to your question, these are not the categories in which I frame my thinking. I do not think about my role in history. Let other people who are interested in that think about that. I've never read a single book about myself. I'm simply working day in, day out, attending the current issues, and also casting my view in future so that these current tasks do not impede me from addressing strategic issues. Yes, this is a routine job, that's true, but I think that I also have to think about what I'm to do today, tomorrow, within 3 years, because, you know, we have a budget scheduled for the next 3 years, and we're also thinking about strategic goals as well. And it is precisely to these ends that we have come up with and are implementing national goals, national projects. But this has nothing to do with my desire to save a place for myself in the annals of world history. No, this is about me trying to reinforce Russia, to strengthen it, to ensure the future of our nation. And what, as for the estimates, assessments from future generations, it is up to them to decide. And I think when these assessments are made, I am not going to be interested in hearing them. I'm a pragmatic man in that sense.
Стараюсь работать не
And
на
I'm trying to do
свой имидж мирового лидера.
everything not to build an image of a world leader, which, incidentally, I do not consider myself to be. I do not think in any way I'm different from my colleagues, leaders of other countries. What I'm working at is strengthening the country. This is my goal in life. Thank you very much. I cannot but remember your interview several months ago before the constitutional vote, the plebiscite, when you said overtly that an opportunity to stay as president beyond 2024 was a guarantee against bureaucracy, against people searching for a successor. But if it stays like this, there's never going to be a successor. It's a vicious circle. Well, actually, I do not mean to stand forever. The changes you've mentioned, the amendments to the Constitution, do not simply seek to provide the current president an opportunity to stay beyond 2024. These changes, first and foremost, seek to reinforce the sovereignty of Russia, to chart a course forward for development, to lay a constitutional foundation for economic development, social development, and also in reinforcing our sovereignty. And I think that this is all going to function and work. And as for what happens beyond 2024, we will answer that question when we're near that time. And so far, as Francisc is a city has said, we have to work everyone till the ground. Mr. President, Alexander Rao. Mr. President, I also have this nostalgia. I remember your speech in Bundestag when you proposed a common space from Lisbon, from Vladivostok. Do you regret that? But I have to tell you that Germany, France supported this idea. It's Eastern Europe that didn't support this idea, and the US that prevents us building relations with Russia, even though many Europeans want that. If you had a chance to speak before the Bundestag, would you include a proposal to work on digitalization into that speech, or maybe something about an environmental partnership that could bring Europe and Russia back together? I think this is a very good idea for the future. Well, what exactly would I say if I were to speak before the Bundestag? You remember, back then when I spoke, I think it was in the noughties, and many colleagues said that it was very risky, it was not very good. But what did I say exactly? I said it was inadmissible when one country pushed beyond its national borders, its jurisdiction, trying to subject other countries to these legal norms. Just broadly, that is what I said. But what is happening right now? Aren't European leaders saying that secondary sanctions are inadmissible? Aren't they saying that the US should not extend its jurisdiction to European companies? If they had had the courage to listen to what I had to say, if they had tried to change the situation a little bit, to shift it without undermining the Euro-Atlantic partnership and the structures that exist, NATO, well, because this is not what I was saying. I was simply saying that it was harmful, detrimental to everyone, even to those who was doing that. But when I was saying that, the European partners of ours didn't think it concerned them, and that is why they were turning a blind eye to it. Or as Mr. Chernomyrdin used to say, it never happened, and now it happens again. So, you know, it all happens again. It's getting back to us. And I think it is a lesson to everyone who is trying to pursue a policy of exceptionality. because it undermines, as we can see, the cooperation and interaction between Europe and the US, which in the end comes back to harm the US itself. So why do that? Yes, it might give some tactical benefits, but in the end, it can have very bad strategic consequences, like the erosion of trust. Well, it's not my place to say. We are meeting at the Valdai Club. It is a discussion club, so I philosophize a little bit, but it's absolutely evident. There's nothing surprising, nothing harmful. I never said anything like that in Munich. And if I were to speak once again, I wouldn't say, see, I told you so, and you didn't listen. No, I would not say that. I understand the realities that existed back then, and I see that it's different. We are not living in a vacuum. We see the realities, the great interdependence that exists, and we see all of that clearly. But something has to change. If we are talking about a new world order, then it has to be taken into account when new international relations are being built, and which certainly have to be founded upon mutual respect for one another, respect for the sovereignty of one another. I'm hopeful that we're going to act cautiously, patiently, without undermining the accomplishments of previous decades, but still conforming to the realities of today. We are going to go forward, building relations that are going to be adapted to the requirements of today, as well as to the interests of all agents of international relations.
Alexei Yekaikin, we've talked extensively about environment, so what's the time, is it, by the way? Well, we are wrapping up. We understand that we've exceeded all reasonable limit, but, you know, we couldn't but mention the environment. No, we couldn't. I agree on that. Thank you, Fyodor. Mr. President, might come as an unexpected question for you, but we've met several times previously, and I want to talk about the Antarctic again. Today, during the climate session of the Valdai Club, the topic was brought up. Besides, it's an anniversary year, 20 years since the Antarctic was discovered. So Russia has the strategy for developing Russia's activity in the Antarctic. It's either completed or a work in progress. The new Vostok station is being built in the central part of the Antarctic. I think you're fully aware of this. And it might seem like a rosy success story. And one might come under an impression that everything goes well in the Antarctic, but it's not true. The strategy says everything about infrastructure, it says nothing about science. It's a strange thing, isn't it? So we are investing into infrastructure, so why are we doing this? It might seem that this scientific station is built for, science, and yet science is never mentioned there. So in the Institute of the Antarctic, we have come up with a draft project of operations of the Vostok station, and there are two main domains. First, it's researching the climate of the past using the ice wells drilled in ice, and using the ice status, studying the glaciers. Those are two main issues for Russia. We have top-notch science in Russia in this regard, and yet there's no state support of the scientific research in the Antarctic, which I find rather odd. We have sent the draft project to the Ministry of Natural Resources. I don't know where exactly in the pipeline it is, The question is very simple. Can the government support our effort and the scientific track on our Antarctic research or not, and the subject will wither on the vine? Alexei, thank you for the question. The fact that you and your colleagues have actually reached the Vostok Lake and made this discovery that you discovered water there that is, what, 1,000 years old, and that had never been connected to the world above. It's a huge thing. It's huge. It's always been trapped under ice, and I understand the academic curiosity in the scientific community and learning how the climate changed over the history. I've seen these water samples myself when you brought it to me, and the infrastructure that you mentioned, it's the groundwork. It's the groundwork for the research activities. I don't know in particular what funds have been allocated for the infrastructure, what funds were allocated for the research. As far as I know, there are certain reductions in place for the Ministry of Natural Resources. These are enforced restrictions given the economic downturn. I don't know whether it was really expedient and necessary to cut down the Antarctic research funding. If there is somebody guilty, those will be punished. And we'll look into this. Mr. President, you said that you are not missing Cold War any bit. Are you missing something? Well, I miss my children. I rarely see them these days. Well, and we are in Valdai Club here, very much missing an opportunity to be here in person. I mean, 100% in person. Well, you see, we have some remote technologies in place that can help us to still hold it even during the pandemics, but we very much hope that next year we will be having this, we'll be having you in person. I think we haven't broke the record. We've been talking for almost 3 hours, and there was an occasion when we've talked for more than 3 hours, but we are really, really grateful for the President, for Your Excellency, and we'll try to get back to normal as soon as possible, and we're looking forward to meeting you here in person. Well, thank you as a host, and I want to address all the members of Valdai Club, to experts, statesmen, journalists who work within this, well, I think it would be no exaggeration to say institution. It's a very beneficial effort, and I am very grateful to all of you for putting your interest in Russia, to paying interest to our histories, to our present. It testifies to one thing for me. You are people who are passionate about something, and we are very grateful for your passion. We think that this is very useful and instructive to check, to compare notes, to know what you think about our country, to compare our ideas of what's of bad and good, of good and evil. And I think through this comparison we can somehow fine-tune and adjust our planning. And I want to thank you for your contributions and inputs, and I truly hope to meet you in person anytime soon. Goodbye.